One thing you touched on that was really interesting to me, and maybe something that might be helpful for some people, is looking back a little bit in the journey getting to Hiero. You mentioned the modularization of the code base, which I imagine was like a massive
It was
effort.
massive.
Yeah, it was massive. And so I just wanted to kind of touch on that. Like, can you take us a little bit through that journey of getting to Hiero? What were some of the like challenges, any kind of big moments in the kind of journey to Hiero?
Yeah, I think there were a few big ones, and it has been a journey.
Hmm.
It's been many years
Okay.
in the making, with intentional decisions that were made along the way. The first one was, you may remember, at the time of open access and for the first year or two after that, the some of the source code of the consensus node was what was known as, what did we call it? Is it open access?
Open. Yeah, it was
Open
open review.
review. I
Open
think we called
review.
it
That's
open
right.
review.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. You know,
So you could see
patented.
the code, but it was like a month delayed from what was actually being built and all that kind of stuff. So I think the first big momentous thing that Hedera did was to purchase that code from Swirlds and open source it all. That was a big deal. So once all that, because it used to be like if you unwound this thing all the way, at one point, Lehman invents the hash graph. He and um, Mance are like, we should build a business around this, and they had several different business ideas that they were pursuing, and Hedera was like one of them, but not the only one, right? They had other ones, and
Right.
so the platform code, as we call it, was sort of owned by Swirlds, and then Hedera used it under license and built on top of it. Is the way that it was. And so the decision by the governing council to actually purchase it from Swirlds and open source it was a really big deal, because now we had a complete source code was open source, and it was all under the Apache 2 license. They didn't do anything funny with some kind of tricky license. It
Sure.
was just straightforward Apache 2. That was a really big deal. Um, then there has been sort of like a continual journey to try to clean up the source code, if you will. I mean, one of the challenges you have is you have an open source code. How do you get people to contribute to that code base? Because if you just open source it but you don't get any contribution,
Yeah.
then okay, people can see your source code, but you don't really have an ecosystem built around it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So getting those contributions is an essential part of what you're trying to accomplish, but it's very difficult to get to. You need to have documentation. You need to have development processes. Like in a normal development team, let's say a non-open source normal development team in the world, you've got Slack or email or whatever you're using for communication. You have a whole bunch of channels on there where all the developers are working on. A new person gets hired into the company. They immediately get rights onto the source code. They can create branches. They can merge. They can do code reviews, all that kind of stuff. If you have a problem, you call up three of your buddies and you work it out, or you go to a whiteboard and you sketch it out. None of that stuff works in an open source context,
Right.
right? If I'm an external developer and all the decisions are happening on a whiteboard somewhere that I don't have any access to, or in a Zoom call that I don't have access to, or to a Slack channel I don't have access to, how can I participate? And if I can't participate, I might spend time working on some code that then everybody else just dumps on or throws away or says it won't work, and I have no
Gotcha.
idea why, right? So part of this journey, which we haven't finished this journey, we're still on it, right?
Mm.
Getting the source code open source is part of it, or not open source, but added as well. Getting it open source, yes. Getting it added to a foundation with governance, yes. But now there's another step that we're still working on, which is open development model. How do you do development in an open way?
Right.
And there's some tricky things there that we have to work through. Like for example, any what's the release process? How do we go through releases? How do we decide what goes into a release and what doesn't go into a release? All that stuff has to be opened up as well in
Hmm.
some way, shape, or form. There's got to be more visibility into what we're doing. We need to have better documentation so that people know what's going on and can actually learn it. Like, how do they learn the
Right.
internals? As a like, I don't know what's the right way to say it. As a person who's always at the very deep end of all these technical details, I know how hard and what the delta is between somebody who's like casually interested and then wants to know the nitty gritty details. There's a huge chasm there,
Hmm.
and if we don't start supplying a path for that, getting contributors would be very difficult. Um, the other thing is just like as of now, if you were to join Hashgraph, you don't immediately become a committer on the project. Sorry, it
Okay.
doesn't happen anymore. You have to earn your place just like everybody else does.
Okay.
So yeah, you want to be a committer, that's awesome. Start contributing. Give us a whole bunch of contributions, and then the maintainers will vote as to whether you get to be a committer or not. And if you want to be a maintainer, guess what? That doesn't happen just because you got a promotion at Hashgraph. Sorry, it doesn't work that way anymore. You want to be a maintainer, a whole bunch of good contributions, and the maintainers have to vote you in as a maintainer. And if you left Hashgraph, if you earned your way up, let's say that you were at Hashgraph and you earned your way up to be a maintainer and then you leave, guess what? You don't lose your maintainership. You're still a maintainer. You earned it.
Right.
It's part of who you are, right? So those sorts of uh, organizational changes are, some of those things are immediate as of now, and some of those things we're still working on. Like, how do we do our communication? LFDT set up some Discord channels for us in the LFDT Discord space. I haven't even logged into it yet. I'm not sure how we're going to do
Right.
that communication, right? Do we just use the discussion boards on GitHub? Do we use Discord? Do we create like
Yeah.
a public Slack that people can join? Like, what do we do? I don't know. We're still trying to figure out some of those details. So it's a journey that we're still on. We're sort of like at the mountaintop, we can see the valley, but we're not there yet.
I think also too, kind of coming back to the beginning of our discussion, and I think that you know, these have really been some key criticisms of Hedera and developing in the space of, as you described, you know, the roles and capabilities of affecting the network are or have been tied to your organization. Which is, I think, the source of a lot of these kind of symptoms of frustration we see in the community.
Absolutely.
And what you're really getting at is this actually is a process of decoupling control over how you can affect the network from where you work, essentially.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's one of the things that I'm very excited about is, you know, because we would feel it, right? There was, the frustration was very real on Discord. There were some very, you know, hurtful things said at times.
Yeah.
And we would just be like, the fundamental root cause of the problem here is that people don't feel like they have any other way to affect the outcome.
Right. Other than getting angry and expressing frustration through force. That's the only mechanism they've had, right?
All they have is totally understandable. 100%. I get it, right? And if they didn't, they would never be heard, right? It was like the only thing they could do.
Yeah.
So it was like the system was set up to produce that sort of discontent, which is not good.
Yes.
The nice thing about having proper governance is that anybody can earn a spot. And now, you know, anybody can earn a spot. And so do it. Go for it. And the consequence of that should be a much more together sort of approach.
Yeah. I like that. And one thing I want to touch on too, you mentioned you're still on this journey, and the next challenge is, how do we stand up these pillars for communication, for collaboration? I mean, open source software development has changed so much over the past 10, 20 years. And a lot of people do view open software or open source development much like they see like content creators and stuff, where nowadays a lot of folks might not be familiar, but like some of the web applications you use are critical infrastructure, like are dependent on like 2-3 people, you know? And so there are these loud personalities. There are these big things. So when you have a product that, you know, has, you know, I imagine like dozens of repositories, and you have this big Hiero ecosystem, right? You really start to think about all those different personalities attaching to different parts of it, leading different parts of it. Like, what are you interested in, diving in? And then the complexities of conversations. And what I would say, as maybe a piece of feedback for you guys on this next step of the journey is, I think when we look at how do we communicate and how do we build up those pillars, I think that the ecosystem already, and many of these folks in the ecosystem may already have those answers, or have maybe already developed some of those channels. There might already be some of these nooks and crannies in this ecosystem where these people are already kind of working on stuff. So I think that definitely it might be an opportunity for you guys to take a pit stop and kind of go, hey, is this kind of communication and collaboration potentially already happening can we step into that?
Yeah.
Similar to what you guys have done at a broader scale at the Linux Foundation of going, well, there's this thing already here. Maybe instead of reinventing the wheel, we step into it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's on the day-to-day work that engineers have, one of the challenges that we'll be faced on this whole communication side is um, the effort that it takes to communicate broadly versus one-on-one. So
Yeah.
in the, like, for example, before your call, this call, I was on another call and we were discussing the details around how we dynamically change the address book that's used by consensus nodes. If you were to look at community nodes and anonymous nodes, in order to
Yeah.
get there, we need to wait for somebody to be able to add a node to the network or remove a node from the network dynamically. Whereas
Right.
today we can only do it at upgrade boundaries, each month. It'd be nice if I had a new node and I showed up and I said, "Here's my new node, and look,
Yeah.
people have stakes to it. Will you please, plug it in and it starts working?" That'd be nice. For that, we need what we call a dynamic address book. So we're talking about the details of that. Now, I had written all this stuff down. We had this big document. It's actually on GitHub. You could go look at it. It has all the details on the architecture and design of the consensus system, and how dynamic address books fit into it and all that kind of stuff. And with the other experts on the team, there was a misunderstanding. We didn't understand each other. And so we got onto a call, after a couple of weeks of back and forth online. It's like, okay, let's just get a call and
Yeah.
work this out. That'll be one of those things that we just have to figure out, how do we do this effectively in open source sense?
Right.
If we do everything through typing, then it's going to take longer to get understanding and get things done. Because I'm sure that the people who are listening, they're not just like, yeah, that's great, you guys are building great software. What does it mean to me? Like,
Yeah.
how do I get my HIP implemented? If I were to say, oh yeah, HIPs are going to take 10 times longer to get done, you'd be like, no, that's not acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah.
It shouldn't get worse. So I think part of the challenge that we have on the communication side is to figure out, how do we do it in such a way that we don't lose any of the effectiveness at actually getting things implemented.
Right.
Long term, it always works better for you, because those communications required you to write things down, to create diagrams, to publish documentation, and all those things are good for the next person who comes in to learn the system. But like in the moment, it can be really frustrating, because you're like, this should have been like a 3-hour thing, and now it's a 3-week thing. What's going on here? And
Yeah.
so those are just the sort of challenges that we have to work out. But
yeah, I think the other thing that you hit on too that was very interesting is you're talking about this chasm between someone just piquing their interest into things and then diving in really hardcore into Hiero. And I think something that should be continued is, I do think that a lot of soon-to-be developers catch the bug on social media platforms, most prominently X.
Yeah.
And I think that those forms of communication are so important, because everybody gets to be a fly on the wall. And seeing what you've been doing was like super refreshing, where I was like, not only are people getting the information they need, but I'm actually watching Richard kind of learn in real time, like, oh yeah, that's how to explain this, or okay, that's how this is kind of connected. And it's this really fast feedback loop. So there might also be something to be said about like working backwards a bit and going, sure, we're on this other side of the chasm, we're going to have to come up with all sorts of various robust workflows and stuff. But on this side of the chasm, what if we just tweet more? And so I think that that's something cool, where in that particular situation you described, it might be so valuable in so many different ways for you to just maybe after the show or something, just post one of those tweets and be like, we're trying to work on this address book thing. And like, this is kind of what happened. This is what kind of we're thinking of. And as you see, all of a sudden people start piling in. And I feel like a lot of those people are soon to be developers, maintainers, board members of this thing. And if they don't get that chance on kind of that far side of the chasm, I think that's really where the magic's going to happen as well. So it's so funny in this industry, and I think in the open source development industry more broadly, it's like sometimes it just comes down to posting a tweet. It's so stupid, but it's so true.
Yeah. Even with like out proper context, or sometimes I worry like, it's like, I could put this tweet out, and nobody will understand anything that it means. And oh, I should do another thing, and then I should write some more context, and then I should.
Right.
Next thing you know, it's turned into this massive thing, and I'm like, oh, I can't do that. And I think I just need to. I think you're right. Like building the bridge from both sides is what we need to do in
Yeah.
order to make it
And the
work.
really cool part as well is it's not like the hash graph where you have to carry over the state with every message. Like I fall into that trap
Yeah, right.
sometimes, right? I fall into that trap sometimes where it's like, I wanted to say like, oh, this thing's happening now, but I'm like, but are they going to know what I mean by that? And I got to do this thing. And what I've learned is that's kind of what when you have these followers, that's kind of what it's all about is when they read the next one, they're still holding the state of all the different things you've said previously, and they're adding it to their like little internal hash graph kind of thing. And so I think you could, like, I would definitely encourage, other folks in their bio where I'm not comfortable on social media, similar to yourself. That's really the beauty of it is you can look at X as like just a big group conversation. And I think you can trust that most of the people that are following you and participating in those discussions are right along there with you. And I think it's totally fine to not worry so much about context and just kind of send the next message, send the next thought. I think, my best tweets are the ones that I put the least thought into, to be honest, the ones that resonate with people the most. So I definitely encourage that 100%. Everybody on the team,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm definitely not the only one who's uncomfortable with tweeting. But I think that it is important. I mean, I follow people too who I'm like actually really impressed with what they did. In terms of how they tweet. I'm definitely not an engagement farmer, that's for sure. Just gonna
not a reply guy.
No, I'm just throwing out whatever whatever I've got. No, I think that's really good insight, and it is something that I need to do, and I've kind of felt that way actually for a few years.
Yeah.
I have to say though that the work, one of the things that I love about working on Hedera's code is, as an engineer, it's like the trifecta of all the hardest things that you have to try to do. So your number one, all the code is open source. So, as an engineer, you always want your code to be good.
Yeah.
You really want it to be good if everybody else can look at it. So, there's some incentive there. Number two, it's got to be absolutely secure. Billions of dollars are riding on this thing.
Right. Yeah.
You cannot screw this up.
Yeah.
Number three, it's executing on the public internet in the most hostile environment possible. So you have to be very careful about what you build, because it's not like if I was writing bank software. Bank software has trillions of dollars running on it too. Yes, but I don't have to worry about internal, the internal systems being, attacking each other. Whereas on a public internet, you have to worry about these sorts of things. It has to be incredibly high performance. It has to, let's see, we got the performance, we got the security, we got the fact that it's open source. Oh yeah, and the other one, you have to deliver features quickly, because you don't want to miss the NFT thing. You don't want to miss whatever the next big thing is. You have to be able to deliver quickly. Those are really hard things to do. It is very hard. In fact, in the software engineering industry, it's generally, the three sides of the triangle. It's impossible. You pick two, you can't pick all three. You want security, you want fast development and performance. Like, pick two, you don't get to pick three. Here we pick all three. So it's an incredibly difficult task. And if you look at Ethereum, they actually don't do the speed of change thing. They picked two, which was they wanted to have stability, and they didn't even get performance out of it. They just picked one, like stability. Again, not saying anything bad about those guys. Super impressed with a lot of things that they do.
We love you, Ethereum. We love you.
Yeah, that's right. No, I'm like super impressed. A lot of things they do, I look at and say, yep, that's very good. We should do more like that. But in this case, at Hedera, it's like we've got all three of the hard problems, and we're doing them all simultaneously all the time, which is, so for anybody who's thinking about, what good open source project you want to contribute to, if you're looking for the most hardcore, it's right here. It doesn't get any more hardcore than this. So there's lots of really good problems to solve.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, before I move on to my just kind of my last couple questions here is, yeah, just to, I think I see that as definitely one of the best first steps you guys can take in this on the other side of this is now that the mechanism of resistance has been removed. It's like we've talked about the separation of these roles to where you work. I think that it's a much better opportunity for you guys to come out front on social media. And when you hit these walls where you're like, what do we kind of do? Like really lean on this community and even the non-developers in this community that are users of the product that can provide that product feedback in a really direct way. I think that really the winning open source projects out there are the ones that have, the engineers out front communicating with the users and in a public forum. Cause at that point it's like you're killing three birds with one stone. It's like everyone can see what's going on. Not a lot of folks are in GitHub. And it's motivating, like probably getting those messages and having those conversations and stuff is like very motivating to kind of be like, wow, okay, the feedback loop is tight on this,
And I think it's great for the community too. Like they need to know that there's a lot of engineering work that's going on. And you don't have that visibility. You go what's going on? What's being developed? I didn't see a new feature. What's happening? There's a lot of work going on. And I know like community nodes is one of those things, right? It's like, oh, community nodes is removed from the roadmap. Everybody gets upset. Well, it was just in the next 3 months. It's not in the next 3 months. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to get there. Real technical work that has to be done in order to get there. And we're working on it heavily, but it's not like, so I think having more of that open communication helps solve those problems. It's kind of like with the other one, right? Why are people angry? Because they cannot participate. They have no way of being able to participate. Why are people, discouraged about the roadmap? Because they don't see everything that's going on into the roadmap. If they had more visibility into what was going on, like when Vitalik gets up and says, we got the merge and the splurge and the purge and the whatever urges, all of his urges, it's actually really helpful, right? Everybody can look at it and they can go, oh yeah, okay, I can see where we are on this journey. None of those things are telling me that it's going to be the next 3 months or 6 months or whatever. But all of those things are telling me where our journey is and what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I think that kind of communication is really important. And those are the sorts of things that Hiero will be publishing is, here are all the projects that we're working on. And this is why we're working on them. And this is where community nodes is in that list and why we have to do these other ones before we can get there.
Gotcha.
They have to be built on top of it.
I think that's a key thing you hit on is it's not just where is it in the roadmap and what is in the roadmap, but what's the thought process behind it? What's the reasoning for it? What's the context for it? I think that's been the missing piece for so many people of like, okay, we got the stuff in the roadmap, but why this and not that? Why this ahead of the other thing? And it's felt like if Hedera would just kind of provide that insight, it's like, I'm pretty sure most people would be like, oh, I get it. That makes sense. Or I don't understand this stuff, but it's great that, there's someone that does, so I think that is going to be hugely valuable for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hiero will be the home for these things. Hiero's doing the roadmaps, the hips and all that kind of stuff will be coming out of the TSC.